Welcome to Sat Interviews with your host, Farai Muvuti. Now, with the African diaspora in the UK growing so significantly to a point of contributing to culture and the economy, a number of market players are looking at this particular constituency with the focus of pivoting it towards Africa. Now, today I sit down with the visionary founder of Clear Mobitel, Harpal Mann, and we explore and unpack further what their vision is for this particular demographic. Now, tune in as we have this discussion. Welcome again to Sat Interviews with your host, Farai Muvuti. Welcome to Sat Interviews. And thank you for joining me, Harpal. Now, when it comes to Clear Mobitel, what inspired the start of this project? And what market gap were you trying to fill?
Yeah, thank you, Farai. First of all, to all of the viewers, listeners, and readers of SAT, I want to thank you for giving me an opportunity to have a discussion with you on what our plans are, both here in the UK and in Africa. Coming back to your question, right, what inspired me to start Clear Mobitel? Just to run back through my background. So I was born in Kenya in Africa to a business family. There was generations, in farming, transport. And so when I went to study in the United States, I had a career in engineering. And in that career, I joined 3 startup companies. And as you know, in the Silicon Valley, that's how you generate wealth, is by starting your own company. So I was based here in Europe in about 2006 to 2008, and I was working mostly on fixed telecommunications networks. At the time, the world was changing, and you could see the emerging markets, and obviously the big markets of China and India were determining what kind of equipment would be manufactured. And the West, Europe, and the United States were less relevant because the bigger numbers were in those 2 markets. So at that time, there was a paradigm shift from fixed networks to mobile and wireless-based networks. And that's how I decided that it's time to pivot towards starting a mobile network, but not just a mobile network, but a network that actually addresses real, problems. Having lived both in America, in the UK, been born in Kenya, I could clearly see a huge difference between urban centers and rural centers. There's a digital divide between those who can afford it and those who basically, struggle to put food on the table. And I felt that, someone who was lucky to have been part of, a lot of startup companies, and I was blessed that I decided to take, the plunge into starting Clear Mobitel. It was not a very easy decision. We, went through a lot of hurdles, but that was the whole goal, is to bring a plane, level field between urban, rural, have and have-nots, and to give, people a chance, right? I believe that connectivity should be a right. It should not be a privilege of, of the rich and those, who have the means. So given the market size of the large communities that we could address, I felt that, it was a viable business case, and so we embarked on our journey for Clear Mobitel. Obviously, Clear Mobitel has evolved, right, to not just being a telecoms company, but we are a technology-driven telecoms company in which we use technology to solve problems and address, socioeconomic differences that exist in society.
And that's quite interesting. So, and I suppose in the question of technology, you're dealing with fixed 5G. Now, that's quite interesting. Can you tell me, for those that are unfamiliar, why is fixed 5G such a game changer?
Yeah, so there's 2 parts to technology, right? Whether it's a 4G and 5G, you have 2 versions of it. You have fixed. So if we sit in this room and you have a Wi-Fi network, that's a fixed network, right? So you connect to it and it's connected, it doesn't transition. When you're in a mobile network, let's say you're walking from one station to another station, you go from one station, then your call transitions from one base station to another base station. So the base station is basically a tower. So that's called a mobile network. So in a wireless terms, right, so you have a fixed network that can then transition into a mobile network. So if you look back into the history of mobile networks, right, you had a 2G network that was just, giving the ability for a person to move from one place to another without dropping their call. Prior to that, you had your old telephone sets, right, which no longer exist, but that's where the telecommunications started. Then from the 2G, they added some data, which is your SMS messages, that became 3G. After 3G, right, there was a small revolution in 4G, which is called the LTE, long-term evolution, that now gave you more speed. The internet was, at its infancy. You could now, read newspapers online. So that was your 4G. And probably about, 5 to 7 years ago, you had, people talking about 5G, NSA, non-standalone. And that 5G is basically a 5G running on 4G equipment. So it's actually not a pure 5G. What we have done here in the UK, and we will be rolling out in Africa, is a pure 5G standalone network. That's a complete technology shift from the older 2G, 3G, 4G, and 5G NSA to a 5G standalone. What this does is it now looks into the shifting space of communications. So, initially people were reading newspapers, then you went to reading websites. Now you've gone into Facebook, you've gone into Twitter, you've gone into TikTok. All of these applications require large amounts of pictorial data to be downloaded. 5G standalone allows you not only to have your Facebook and TikTok seamlessly connected, but the communication will now move into video communications in the future. So instead of typing your messages, you should be able to have virtual rooms in which you are somewhere and you could be talking to people, and the experience will be seamless as if we are sitting next to each other. So that's where
what we see like on Twitter Spaces that can actually be transfigured
to in a mobile mobile network, right? So if you see that here in the UK, right, there was an abundance of investment in fiber to the home, but you and I know that how many people stay at home? We are all mobile. Whether we are sitting in a cafe, you're at a beach, you're at holiday. So your mobile phone is your number one source of communication. So what we are focused is, how do we make sure that wherever you go, you have that connectivity that the fiber network gives you in your home. 5G standalone brings us closer to that. And 5G standalone adds another part of it, which is encryption. So, people will say, well, we have Wi-Fi networks, right? Wi-Fi network is not a secure network. You cannot be, checking your bank account on a Wi-Fi network because anyone can hack into it and get your credentials.
Whereas with 5G
standalone, it's a one-to-one connection in which you're now secure. You can actually run your transaction anywhere without fear, right? So we took a risk. Last year, we were the first to deploy 5G standalone here in the UK. And as you're aware that, we are, expanding into Africa, that's where, our value add will be to use 5G standalone.
Now, and this is well and good, but what makes you stand out from your Vodafone, your EEE, the Libaras within the UK market, for instance?
Very, very good question. So if you see the existing legacy players in the UK market, right? So this is Vodafone, O2, 3, and EE. They all started with 2G, they added 3G, and then they upgraded to 4G, and then now they have 5G, what's called 5G NSA. Just, I think, a few weeks ago, EE has started, BT and EE, which is the same company, have started trials on 5G SA. We were the pioneers of 5G SA in deploying a core, right? Now, there is an equipment ready, it's slowly coming into the market, that we are leaders in this. I believe as a small company, we cannot be a Me Too network. we have to differentiate ourselves. And from a technological point of view, we have to be superior. Right? From a customer service point of view, we have to be superior. From providing services to the consumer and to businesses, we have to be better. So by being a base of 5G standalone, we actually have an advantage because we give you secure communications, we give you low latency. So if you see the latency is basically the time from here to there. In the 5G NSA or 4G, it's about 10 milliseconds. We in 5G SA bring that to 1 millisecond. So your connection is going to be 10 times faster.
So downloads are equally quicker.
Downloads, your video communication, right? That's the bigger thing is when you see there's a lag in the picture, right? This will make it seamless, right? And then you see in things like fintech transactions, right? When you're remitting your your money to your family, whether it's in the UK or anywhere else, you need that security, right? Because you're accessing your bank account, you're accessing your credit card. You want to make sure that's there. The other thing that 5G standalone brings is it brings in this whole notion of 5G private networks, right? Which now address industry, whether it's mining, it's ports, it's shopping centers, right? I'm looking at 5G standalone as a solution for villages in Africa that where we can actually connect them, that they can have an abundance of connectivity locally, and then you have a backhaul that if they want to connect to a bigger city.
I see. So Wales serves as somewhat of an evidence-based concept node.
Exactly. Now coming back to Wales, right? Why Wales? Prior to coming to Wales, right, we spent a significant amount of time in New Zealand. So we worked with the native people of New Zealand, the Maori. We have a strategic partnership with the Maoris in how to improve their quality of life, right? The average age of the Maori is about 40, 45, right? They are sort of left behind. So we started working with the elders in the community to see what can we do with technology. And we believe that addressing rural markets, this is where the indigenous people are, that we can now help educate them on choices of what food do they eat, exercise, healthcare, education, so that they actually have the same opportunities as someone who's living in a bigger city. Now, if I go to Wales, and clear example is the UK went through Brexit, so the rural communities did not see the benefits of someone living in London. Same thing in connectivity. If you go to places like Wales, you go to places like rural England, there is a lack of connectivity and affordable connectivity, right? So we are designing our solutions to address that market. So from investors, they always say is, how can you be profitable? Because profits are always in big population centers, but from a technology point of view, we are coming up with innovative solutions. I've been working on this for the past 10 years, is how do we make smaller connections with lower capex? Capex meaning how much capital is going on. So if you look at the old base stations, they cost about $250,000. The new base stations use small cells. They use smaller, femto cells that you can then aggregate. Right?
So in other words, you're providing access at a cheaper rate.
At a cheaper rate by having equipment that doesn't need to be $250,000.
So if I were an investor, I would be looking at that as an opportunity. Because of the bottom line not being impacted.
Absolutely.
So you'd say that the legacy businesses, the reason why they're not in these rural constituencies,
because they are taking
big base stations
to a small area,
and
which
perhaps there's no majoritarian outlook.
Exactly.
Okay. Right.
And just to give you a little background why I thought this way. My background is, I was working as a chip designer in the Silicon Valley.
Okay.
I've designed hardware system in which we look into aggregation, right? So you aggregate like packet, right, that comes into a switch, and then you aggregate into a picture. And so I'm using the same, architectural concept that we use in building chips in deploying a network, which is completely different to the legacy networks, right? The legacy networks have a 2G. Now they just need to put a 3G and a 4G. What happens is with the spectrum, right, the airwaves that go out, with every G, the distance that goes out reduces. Now, the base stations are sitting at a fixed length, but as you go to 5G, you go a small distance, maybe 2 kilometers, and after that, the cell drops, which is why your calls drop.
So for someone uninitiated, maybe the best example I could use is the difference between ChatGPT and DeepSeek.
Exactly.
In a world that never stops, you need a connection that keeps up.
Introducing Clear Mobitel's UK eSIM and SIM solution, designed for the modern traveller, professional and digital native.
Stay connected wherever life takes you with Clear Mobitel's ultra-fast, reliable eSIM and SIM services. No more swapping SIM cards. Activate your eSIM in seconds and enjoy seamless, uninterrupted connectivity. Whether you're at home, at work or on the go, Clear Mobitel gives you fast data and crystal clear calls. No boundaries, no interruptions. Perfect for those who need high-speed data for business, entertainment, or everything in between.
And for those exploring the UK, say goodbye to roaming charges. Clear Mobitel keeps you connected without the extra cost.
Clear Mobitel, a new way to connect anytime, anywhere.
Right, where you figured out how to actually still
Optimize,
but at a cheaper cost.
cheaper rate.
Got you.
Yeah.
Now, you focus primarily on the African diaspora market.
Yeah.
Now, it's a very substantive market,
Yeah.
given the fact that it's your middle class in orbit.
Yeah.
For those on the continent, it has been able to dwarf your humanitarian aid, FDI, going into Africa.
Yeah.
And you focus on the UK market specifically.
Yeah.
Why is that?
So I'll give you, as I briefly mentioned in my background, right? Mm-hmm. So I am African. I was born in Africa. I understand Africa. I understand the sentiment, the culture, the people. I also know that when Africans come to the diaspora, whether it's in the UK or the US or Canada or New Zealand, Australia, you always want to send money back to your family because, we are a cultured society where family is important to us. Mm-hmm. The UK, having been a colonial master to a lot of the African countries, has a special relationship to the continent of Africa. And the diaspora that has come here to the UK is quite successful. If you look into areas of, the finance industry, if you look into the areas of healthcare, if you look into the areas of care homes, the African diaspora in the UK is doing quite well, right? And as the diaspora, established itself here, the diaspora sends a significant amount of money and contribute positively to the economies of the African nations. So if I look at the case of Zimbabwe, right? Mm-hmm. So Zimbabweans remitted about $2.5 billion to Zimbabwe. That's a significant chunk. And I've always argued that the diaspora needs to have a seat at the table in any government policy because they are a big mover of the economy, right? Yes, they may be smaller, but as a group, they're there. And what I would like to do is I would like to work with the diaspora in giving them a voice through our platform, whether it's a mobile platform, a fintech platform, the ability to make change, to bring real change back home in the African countries, because they are a powerful group, but because they are smaller, we are trying to bring them all together from a technology point of view that they can now have a voice. They say that this is what we impact the GDP in African countries, and we would like to see structural changes, right? Whether it's clean water, electricity, road networks, and the ability for real change after tens of years of independence. The fruits of independence have to be seen by everyone, including rural communities in Africa.
And I get that perception. So, in as far as, so one of the areas of connectivity where there is a barrier of entry, perhaps with the diaspora, is the cost of connectivity itself.
Yes.
So, for instance, if I'm on O2, I can't call directly to Zimbabwe or South Africa.
Correct.
With my O2. Perhaps if I am to do so, it costs an arm and a leg.
Correct.
So what we then tend to do is we use calling cards and so forth as replacement to get direct connectivity.
Yeah.
Now, Clear Mobitel, I suppose, targeting the African diaspora in particular, this is one fundamental question that we will ask, is does that change the cost significantly?
Absolutely. So Clear Mobitel is always cognizant of the cost.
Okay.
Right. So there's the biggest advantage Clear Mobitel has compared to any of the legacy networks is we have a network here in the UK. We are building a 5G network in Jersey and Guernsey in the Channel Islands. So just going from the UK to the Channel Islands, there's a roaming cost. When you call a number from the UK to a Channel Islands number, it costs you at least about 50 to 75p, even though they're both within the crown. Okay. What we want to do is we want to break that calling cost. And the way you do that is if you have networks in both jurisdictions, right? Now we actually use what is called gateways that connect both jurisdictions. So when you call the Channel Islands, we know that Farai is on a Clear Mobitel network and he's calling the Channel Islands. We then route that through our gateway. So when the call reaches the Channel Islands, it then becomes a local call.
Got it.
Okay. And the same thing we want to do in Africa. We will, we signed a major MOU with the government of Zimbabwe.
We'll go into that.
And we would like to, set up gateways in Africa so that these calling is improved. Obviously, with WhatsApp and Signal and other, technologies, people are now using data for calling instead of using the older direct phones. But we will address both, in which we want to bring down the overall cost of connectivity lower, because I believe that at the end of the day, telecom companies should not be benefiting from something that should be a right, but at the same time, that money that you use on calling cards, you could actually use it for proper purpose, to help your family at home, to help your kids here, that money goes back. I do not believe that in this day and age,
so is that benefit of international calling?
Absolutely.
Is it going to be contingent on you having base stations in Africa, or does that
there's two
exist
ways
without that?
So what we're going to do is we're going to reduce the calling cost immediately of what legacy players are offering.
Right.
And this is through a partnership we have signed with Telecom Italia. So Telecom Italia gives us access to about 200 countries around the world. So piggybacking on their network, we will reduce those calling costs significantly, number one.
Great.
Number two is when we build networks in Africa, then the cost goes to zero.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
And what that does is, it's a game changer in the industry, is not only will we reduce the cost of calling, but we'll also make sure that when you travel from the UK to initially,
which is my next question.
To an African country, we can start off with Zimbabwe. Obviously, we're looking at all of the SADC countries and then expanding all over Africa. Is you won't have to pay any roaming costs, right? You won't have to go buy a local SIM card.
Zero roaming costs.
Zero roaming costs, right? You won't have to buy a local SIM card in the country where we have a network.
No. I need to emphasize on this, because I tell you why. I travel a lot to Africa, and I'm sure you're aware of this. Now, every time I go to, let me use Zimbabwe as a case study. When I go to Zimbabwe, I remove my O2 SIM, and I buy a local network, right? And then I use that SIM. Then I have to pay, of course, the local, the local, be it your in Zimbabwe they call it juicing up, or top up here, right? So you're saying that if I'm traveling from the UK and I'm going to Zimbabwe, I will not need to find another SIM card.
No.
I will literally be able to use that Clear Mobitel SIM card in Zimbabwe.
Absolutely. Once Clear Mobitel builds our network in Zimbabwe.
So once Clear Mobitel. But in the meantime, I'll still need to.
You still need to.
I'll still need to.
But
remove.
what we are working on is with the partnership we've had with Telecom Italia, is we will give you what's called a traveling SIM.
Okay.
Right? That you would be able to buy that here as an eSIM, and when you travel to Africa, it will still reduce your cost significantly.
So I wouldn't. So I still get the benefit of using a. So tell me more about the travel SIM, because this. So just for clarity's sake, you were saying that Clear Mobitel, during its rollout in the UK, reduces cost significantly. Now that's the one aspect. But when I travel, in the immediate sense, I will not be able to, of course, benefit from the roaming aspect until the base, the data centers are built in Zimbabwe.
So let's back off.
Let's clarify that.
So Clear Mobitel in the UK is launching 2 different products.
Okay.
One is a complete UK SIM, eSIM, that gives you data, SMS, and voice.
Okay.
We have signed a strategic partnership with EE in the UK, in which we will be using their network as we are building our own 5G standalone base stations.
Gotcha.
So today, you can actually get a Clear Mobitel network in the UK.
Okay.
That gives you all connectivity throughout the UK. The agreement we have is, if let's say you have 20 GB of data in the UK, within Europe, okay, and we will publish the countries that are, but within Europe, you can use 25% of that data without any roaming costs.
Okay.
Okay?
Right. So
if you have a 20 GB data in the UK, which our prices are probably going to be, the most reasonable, you can take 25% of that, right? 5 GB. You can go to France, you can go to Italy, you don't need to buy anything. Your number will work.
Okay.
Okay? That's number one. Number two, very shortly, we are introducing what you see, with a lot of companies here, including EE, Vodafone, that they sell is what's called a travel SIM. A travel SIM does not give you any voice connectivity, it just gives you data. And that will cover 200 countries around the world. And our prices will be per region. We'll have a SIM for Africa, we'll have a SIM for Asia, we'll have a SIM for Europe, and then we'll also have a global SIM, right? And those prices will also be the most competitive in the market today. That you will be able to add on to your Clear Mobitel SIM, you could add on this travel SIM, that when you go anywhere, you have connectivity. Okay. Now the third part is where we get rid of the roaming. That's when our Zimbabwe network goes live. Then you don't have to buy any travel SIM in Zimbabwe. But let's say if you go to Zambia, in South Africa, you will still need that travel SIM.
Okay.
But we expect, right, our strategy is a SADC strategy in Africa, and that will cover most of the countries in that region. So we're looking into, getting into Mozambique, Zimbabwe, Botswana, and Namibia, where we will be building a digital corridor connecting all of these countries initially, and then we pivot south towards South Africa, and then go towards Zambia, Malawi, Tanzania, DRC, and the rest of the SADC countries. Okay. So we are building a major backbone in Africa that will be,
right. So maybe in the context of Africa, so earlier you mentioned that you signed an MOU with the Zimbabwean government.
Yes.
Tell us more about that, and what is the current progress of the agreement therein?
Yeah, so just to give you, a background on how we got engaged with Zimbabwe. So we started this journey about 3 years ago.
Okay.
The Zimbabwean ambassador to the UK, His Excellency Ambassador Christian Katsande, was very key in convincing us to look at Zimbabwe as a destination. I looked at it and said, okay, fine, what do we have? And he continued to sell us the opportunities in Zimbabwe. We were part of the British business delegation that met with His Excellency President E.D. Mnangagwa here in London during the King's coronation. It was the first time, we heard directly from the President that Zimbabwe is open for business. So a lot of us that were part of the British business delegation took that as serious engagement by the government in wanting to diversify their business prospects around the world in engaging with the West and the UK. Mm-hmm. After that, His Excellency invited us to Zimbabwe, so we traveled with the business delegation to Zimbabwe. We met with His Excellency, and we started looking at opportunities. Obviously, I was looking into technology opportunities, and we started engaging the various ministries, various departments, and then again, the government invited me to participate in SADC. And after attending the SADC, a conference in Zimbabwe is when I looked at a bigger picture from a risk perspective, that if we are in a SADC region, the investment portfolio has lower risk between countries. Mm-hmm. And that then convinced me that maybe it's time to now engage seriously with the government in some assets that we started very detailed conversations with various ministries, especially with the Ministry of Finance, Ministry of ICT, and that led to the MOU we signed in New York, at the United Nations conference. And the MOU is actually comprehensive. It touches 4 different areas, right? Yeah. The one area is forming a PPP with a government-owned asset that has not, done well in the area of telecommunications. The second is the building of data centers in Zimbabwe. So as you know, everyone is talking about AI. We've been working on AI for about 2.5 years now. So for AI, you need data, and I'm very adamant that local data has to remain locally, right? Because it's your sovereignty, and just like the GDPRS here in Europe, mm-hmm. I believe that data is important, and you need to make sure that local data stays locally. So which is why we will be investing in data centers in Africa. The third is a fintech, agri-tech platform, which we have been working on for the past 2.5 years with our companies in the Silicon Valley, that will transform the entire fintech and agri-tech market, that brings in financial inclusion, especially for small-scale farmers and for the vast majority of the populations in Africa that currently do not have access to capital. So that's the third part of the MOU. And the fourth part was, a lot of countries that go to Africa, they go in, sometimes they bring in their own labor, and the Africans do not benefit from whatever investment comes in. Mm-hmm. So we wanted to change that, because I have, full confidence in the people of Africa, that if given an opportunity, they can be good, as good as anyone sitting here in London or the Silicon Valley. They just need to, have an opportunity. So we will be working with the Ministry of ICT in a digital skills academy, looking into the technologies of the future, not anything past. So this is where, with our, background being in the Silicon Valley, that we will bring in big data analytics, AI, and the running of these networks, that we want to make sure that kids in Zimbabwe are focused on these areas of technology, the technology of the future, that after they graduate, right, we will employ them in our operations, and others, will have an opportunity if they want to go overseas, but at least they have the same skill sets as an engineer in the Silicon Valley has.
So just on that aspect, that actually will help strengthen the ecosystem of startups.
Absolutely.
So because of access to cheaper technology.
Exactly. So our goal is, as Farai, I come from the Silicon Valley, mm-hmm. and I was blessed that I made my wealth by being part of startup companies. And I want this ecosystem in Zimbabwe, that someone has an idea, I want them to have a local solution. But we want to make sure that the community is there, in which Clear Mobitel will help at some point, right, with investments into these small startup companies, so that the way I started off, right, I want to make sure that someone else who has an idea, is a brilliant idea, we will invest in them to make sure that they can then grow. So ours is not just an investment in going in and making our money and coming out back and sitting somewhere here in London, but it's changing the dynamic of making Africa self-sufficient in growing that ecosystem of startup communities.
In a world that never stops, you need a connection that keeps up.
Introducing Clear Mobitel's UK eSIM and SIM solution, designed for the modern traveller, professional and digital native.
Stay connected wherever life takes you with Clear Mobitel's ultra-fast, reliable eSIM and SIM services. No more swapping SIM cards. Activate your eSIM in seconds and enjoy seamless, uninterrupted connectivity. Whether you're at home, at work, or on the go, Clear Mobitel gives you fast data and crystal clear calls. No boundaries, no interruptions. Perfect for those who need high-speed data for business, entertainment, or everything in between.
And for those exploring the UK, say goodbye to roaming charges. Clear Mobitel keeps you connected without the extra cost.
Clear Mobitel, a new way to connect anytime, anywhere.
So that you're not always looking at handouts from foreigners or foreign governments, but to make sure that the talent you have within Africa, right, whether it's in mining, optimizing agriculture, optimizing trade, optimizing the local markets, and all of those solutions will originate in Africa.
I think there are a few things that you've said here, especially in the age of Trump, where USAID and so forth, there's been a drawback from a lot of the, and a lot of other European governments are actually cutting down on their aid budgets. The UK announced it yesterday. Netherlands has equally announced it today, I believe. And so there has to be a thinking about the African continents and governments in particular need to be thinking innovatively about how do you find a replacement to that? So building that particular ecosystem.
So I mean, this is where we thought through, right? And it's the same thing, whether it's in Wales or in New Zealand. We want to make sure that rural communities, people from villages,
the majority of African population,
majority of the population, don't live in, for example, in a city like Harare or Nairobi or Johannesburg. They live in rural communities, but they don't have that access, right? The first thing is to build the infrastructure so that they are able to communicate. Once they're able to communicate, now you bring in e-learning, the ability for someone sitting in a village to take a course in Python programming. So someone sitting in a village to eventually, be part of a call center. You don't need to have call centers go anywhere else, right? So that's a significant part of where we also believe that the African markets can grow is in call centers. And then the third thing is, once these kids are productive and the rural communities contribute towards the GDP of the country, then there is more financial activity coming in. Now, I think I'm not going to comment on what the Western countries are doing as far as aid. I believe that Africa's solutions start from Africa. You cannot be looking at handouts from others, right? Africa is a very rich continent. The biggest asset that Africa has are its people, okay? This is one of the most resilient people in the world. Today, they are educated. Today, they are innovative. Today, they are around the world. They're sitting here in the UK. They're sitting in America because they are pioneers. But their kin back home also need that opportunity. We cannot have all of them move to the UK or move to America or move to New Zealand. We want to create opportunities for them locally, that when they have opportunities, right, that impacts the economy, right? The thing is, my vision is of more smaller startup companies, right, than having a large company that sucks up all of the oxygen. So my vision is to have smaller companies with local entrepreneurs, right? Instead of having large, sort of large, big companies, that have 5,000 people, 10,000 people, in which the wealth stays within a few on top. This way, I believe that the wealth can be spread out. You have more entrepreneurs and more people, willing to go.
I mean, I think it's the same thing with the UK, where you have over 80% of its tax base coming from SMEs. Yeah. So it has to be thinking around those kind of things. Yeah. So I like that, and I'm curious to see what. Of course, I won't go into projections in terms of timeframes and so forth, but I think. Are you looking to partner up with independent players within Africa in terms of the telecoms industry itself?
Yeah. So what we want to do in Zimbabwe, and I think this can be replicated around Africa, is we want a joint venture, a public-private partnership with the government. So a lot of the African governments already own telecoms companies, and those telecoms companies, unfortunately, have not been recapitalized, and they cannot compete with the private players. So what we are saying is, there's two ways to approach this. Is you can go out and outright acquire those companies, but I believe that those companies, at the end of the day, irrespective of what government is in there, still belong to the people, because the government is representative of the people. Any government asset belongs to the people of that country. So we believe that by partnering with the government, we are partnering with the people, not an individual, but it's with the population of the country that is represented by the government. And once we recapitalize these assets that are underwater today, that in 5 years from now, when the asset is worth a lot more, we want the government to benefit. We want the people to benefit. Right? So that's a complete game changer in the way I approach this. Right? You can be greedy and you can go and acquire an asset, which from an investment point of view, it's actually very low risk. Everybody wants to do that. But I believe that my purpose here and our vision is not just about being a purely capital company. We want to change the ecosystem, and to bring change, you need to come up with innovative ways. And this is a way for us to always think about who are the owners or who are our partners, and that's the population of that country. And that's where we are looking. Obviously, we will be looking to partner with other local companies in other areas. But from an infrastructure point of view, right, we would like that to be jointly, whether it's a road network, right, it's a freeway. I look at this as digital infrastructure that the people should also have some right to own, because then we don't leave any area behind, right? We have to cover the entire country, not just going into the big cities and then forget about connectivity in rural communities. That's very key for me, is rural connectivity in rural villages, and how can we do that? And I think, with the 5G standalone, there's a very innovative way that, we will pioneer, we will probably, patent this, is we are going to use local networks, private networks that can now allow entire villages to communicate amongst themselves, and then we have backhaul that goes into larger cities.
Verticals. Yeah.
And then this eventually, I look at this, blueprint is now connecting countries within Africa, where when you travel within Africa, you don't have to worry about, roaming charges, because I look at Africa as one network, right? With pieces being Zimbabwe could be considered to be, a large network, but within the large network you have smaller networks. So it's basically an aggregation of networks.
Yeah, because on the continent, especially if you look at South Africa, Zimbabwe, data cost is quite high.
Yes.
And I think that's a major challenge. A lot of companies that are currently residing, the MTNs and so forth, I think that's a fundamental challenge, especially for the growing, ecosystem of startups, podcasters, and so forth. And does that address that then?
Yes. So I mean, Farai, if I mentioned early on, we're building a digital corridor, right? So, we've spoken to, the large investment banks in Africa. We are partnering with African Union. And one of the things that, differentiates us is we are building a digital corridor. So if you look at the history of the internet in America, the internet started, in the late 60s. It was a sort of a collaboration between the Department of Defense, various army bases, and educational centers, universities. So they built, what was a backbone, okay? And that backbone basically became America's backbone when the internet became a public service. That backbone is what drives America's network. Similar in the UK, you have a countrywide backbone that connects all of you. In Africa, what you have today is you have haphazard networks, okay, where the vision was not there to think about the entire continent as far as connectivity. I come from that background, right? So my background is, I went to university in Los Angeles, and I spent a significant amount of time both at the University of Southern California, at UCLA, both were part of the initial internet. And I helped design the campus network. So if you look at both universities, the population at USC is about 45,000 students. That's pretty much like a city. So we worked in designing and innovating that network to see how do you connect 45,000 students? How do you bring in security? How do you bring in the dorms? How do you bring in computing resources? How do you make sure that the academic systems are segregated, right? So in all of that, you have a campus-wide backbone, and then you have the various pieces. Our vision for Africa is having a digital corridor, and this digital corridor will then connect to the subsea cable. So I mentioned that we have a relationship with Telecom Italia. So Telecom Italia has now run 2 new fibers around Africa, and we will be connecting to those fibers. Now from those fibers, we come into Mozambique. From Mozambique, we come into Zimbabwe, to Botswana, and to Namibia. Now you have end-to-end, not only connectivity, but you also have resiliency. Let's say the fiber on this side of the ocean breaks, we can now pick up an alternate fiber on the other side from Namibia to give you that backup connectivity. Then we go south to South Africa. Now we have a 3-way resilience. Now I have 7 patents, and one of my patents is on resilient networks, so that if this fails, the other one takes over. If that fails, the other one takes over. So that's how, my approach in building this in Africa is I'm looking at Africa not from a point of view where a lot of people say, buy the cheapest equipment and run something. We are building a network in Africa that will be on par with what you have in the Silicon Valley, what you have in par in the UK. So it's not cutting any corners. We're looking into the future. We're not looking into the past. And this is what I want to bring up, is that once the network is there, the costs will come down significantly, right? You're talking about data costs. Zimbabwe is one of the largest data in the world,
Some of the cost, yeah.
And so once those data costs are lower, now the infrastructure is in place. Now you enable the ecosystem of the fintech, the agri-tech, a marketplace for the village, for the villagers, who are making, their own wares, and they want to sell them on the marketplace, right?
Which will equally complement the Africa Free Trade Agreement.
Exactly. So this way, we want to enable them. A mama in the village, she's making her kikapu, her basket, and she wants to sell it to someone in London. We will enable that platform, including, the shipping, the transportation, that now brings this person, the ability that she can sell her ware to someone who wants to buy in London.
Well, I mean, this is great news. Now, of course, I'd love to stay all day and discuss this even further, but our time has come to an end. But as a final question, for those that are interested, be it investors, partners, potential clients, and people that want to sort of be a part of this journey, how do they get involved?
So, obviously, they can go to our website, right, clearmobitel.com. Mm-hmm. You can follow us on Twitter, on LinkedIn. And from an investment point of view, right, there's a section for investment. We are looking for investors. As a matter of fact, I'm looking for small-scale investors so that in this journey, everyone should be able to, to benefit, right? At some point, right, our exit strategy is that we will list our company at the New York Stock Exchange, right? It'll be a publicly traded company. And as part of that company that, we want those who want to join our journey, will be able to benefit. And at the end of the day, we want the people to own the network, right? It's not about me, wanting to make the money. I think at the end of the day, it's about the people. That's what, my vision is. And, money has not been an issue for me. I mean, I have enough today, but it's about bringing change, and it's about, lifting all boats together.
Thank you so much for joining us today, Harpal.
Thank you, Farai, for giving me the opportunity.
You've heard it first. Now, African solutions coming from Africans themselves. Now, connectivity has been a big challenge within our continent. Perhaps that solution has come now, fortunately, from an African himself. Thank you for joining me. SAT Interviews here with your host, Farai Muvuti. Take care.